And welcome to Waterdown District High School, where tonight the City of Hamilton is hosting a information session about the possibility of hosting a casino in the new City of Hamilton. My name is Aaron Kirsten. I am the Executive Director of the Flambeau Chamber of Commerce, and I need to be very clear from the beginning that this is not a chamber meeting. This is a City of Hamilton meeting. And for better or worse, they have asked me to be the moderator. And in a moment of temporary insanity, I agreed. Sometimes, participatory democracy, because that's what this is. It's an exercise in participatory democracy. It gets a little bit messy, but you know what? It's way better than anything else. And I'm hoping that you'll work with us in creating a positive and constructive meetings where we do two things, where we listen and where we learn. And that we can give some direction to council as it wrestles with the issue about whether or not Hamilton should be a willing host for a new casino under a restructured Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. We're going to start this evening by asking our panelists to speak for a few minutes in terms of their area of expertise and their perspective. And after that, we will invite you to come forward and to ask your questions or make a comment. But before we do that, and to recognize some of our special guests tonight, I'd like to invite Councillor Judy Partridge, Ward 15, to say a few words.
Thanks very much, Aaron. And yes, I guess it was a lapse in judgment. This is Ward 15. I am Councillor Judy Partridge from Ward 15, Flambeau. But I do want to recognize Councillor Robert Pasuta, who is also here joining us this evening from Ward 14, which is the other side of Flambeau. Thank you, Robert. And Robert and I are hosting this evening's meeting, and I just want to say welcome. Thank you for coming. I am delighted to see such a turnout here this evening. I am joined also by some other councillors, and I'd ask them to stand up and be recognized. Councillor Chad Collins. Thank you, Chad. Councillor Sam Marula. Thank you, Sam. Councillor Terry Whitehead. And Councillor Scott Duval. And I very much appreciate their support in coming here this evening. There will be another forum on tomorrow evening. It will be at City Hall. It will be reasonably the same format. It will be facilitated by our city manager, Chris Murray. Please stand up, Chris. And the same panelists will be joining there. It was very important when we were looking at structuring these forums that they be duplicates so that regardless of which forum you attended, you're receiving the same information. So you will be able, and you're going to hear a lot of information this evening, which is a good thing. So you can keep that in mind. We're also here to hear the same information so that when we're making up our minds, and I will tell you, my mind's made up, it's got to be Flambeau, it has to stay there, and it must be the slots and racetrack and casino operation. Thank you. So that's easy for me to say because I'm committed to that, and I've been committed to that from day one. So thank you again. Thank you to all the panelists for being here this evening. Greatly appreciate it. And for all of you, please do take the opportunity to ask the questions. If you're not able to line up and ask the questions, we will have cards for you to write down. Mike, is that right? Okay, so we do have cards that will be handed out. We want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to make your comments known and to ask your questions so that we can get back to you. Before I leave the podium, I just want to say thank you so very much to the staff that organized this meeting. I want to recognize Norm Schillen. Where's Norm? Norm? He's here somewhere. And Mike Kirkopoulos, who's here, and also Allison Morrison from my office. Allison does an amazing job, and we're very, very grateful to have her. So thanks very much, everyone. Enjoy your evening.
And because this is Flambeau, and because we have another councillor from Flambeau, I'd ask Robert Pasuta if you wanted to say a few words.
Thanks, Aaron, and I don't have a whole lot to say. I'm here the same as the rest of you. I'm not sitting with my colleagues, not that I'm special or different, but my wife is here, and she's here as a citizen of Flambeau too. We're sitting together to listen to the presenters and listen to your questions, so I can take this back. And I do sit on the gaming subcommittee along with Councillor Partridge, Councillor Marula, Councillor Whitehead, and the mayor, so I do sit on that, but we're interested in hearing what you're saying. Real quick, like I said, following them through, and particularly for me, and being a farmer, and we have the Flambeau Downs and the horse racing there, it's near and dear to my heart to preserve the horse racing and keep the slots there, or should it be a casino, be there. We need to keep that there, and I'm going to fight to the end for that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sure that the representative from the OLG will explain this in greater detail, but in Reader's Digest version, the OLG is undergoing a modernization, and as part of that process, two things are required. One, that municipalities must decide whether they're willing hosts in any one of 29 different zones across the province, and second, there must be public consultation. Many municipalities have decided to do this in different ways. I think what the City of Hamilton doing is much more aggressive. It's not just a come and go meeting. It's not just receiving letters or petitions. It is actually going out to the community and asking people for their opinions, and that's what tonight's all about. You must also understand that the City of Hamilton has not yet adopted an official position. The City of Hamilton, this is part of the process, and I think the Council will agree with me. They're waiting to hear what you have to say. They have to make a decision by the end of February, 1st of March deadline, and that's what tonight's is all about. The other thing I think that I need to share with you is that the City is committed to conducting a scientific poll that once, as the clock keeps ticking, they're going to go to the community and conduct a scientific poll as a further indication in terms of what the people of this community think. All right. As I said, we have 7 panelists. These have been chosen by the city. All of them have agreed to take time out of their busy schedules and to share some thoughts and perspectives with you. And we're going to start with Tony Bittonti. Tony is the Senior Manager, Community and Media Relations for the OLG, the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. Tony.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everyone. And on behalf of the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, we want to thank the City of Hamilton and the folks of Flambeau for inviting us here and giving us the opportunity to explain a very complex modernization and transition that our corporation is undergoing, and why we're doing it and how it will impact all of you. You've been able to play the lottery since 1975. You're all familiar with Wintario, Lotto 649, Lotto Max. Casinos have been around the province since 1998 when Casino Windsor, now Caesars Windsor, opened its doors. Our modernization right now is focused on improving customer experience, expanding jobs in the gaming industry and the lottery industry, and increasing the public money that goes really to you, to the people of Ontario. To do this, we're doing 3 things. First, we're becoming more customer-focused. This means that OLG will be where our customers want us to be, and we'll be providing them the games and the products that customers want to play. Second, we're expanding the regulated private sector delivery of lottery and gaming. And really what this means is that we've identified areas of our business where it makes sense that these qualified private sector service providers will be involved instead of the government. That's really what the involvement of the private sector really does mean. And finally, OLG is renewing its role in the oversight of lottery and gaming. This means we're looking for ways to be even more efficient and focused on rather important priorities for us, one of them being responsible gambling. So really, what are these 3 tenets? What does this mean to you and to your community? Hamilton is currently one of 24 communities that hosts a gaming facility in this province, and you're all familiar with the slots of Flambeau Downs. I just want to mention that OLG has a great relationship with the owners of the racetrack, Great Canadian Gaming, and the gentleman right beside me, Bruce Barber. We work very closely with him and his folks, and we're very proud of that relationship, and we will continue with that relationship. The new OLG, though, will have qualified service providers running the day-to-day operations of our gaming facilities, with OLG overseeing them, really overseeing the management of that operation. And in order to get these service providers to be interested to put up the money to run our facilities, maintain them, and possibly even expand them, we have to give them options. And that's why we created what you're hearing of these gaming zones that surround our existing facilities. These are areas where there is the potential to relocate gaming facilities. This is the option that we have to give to the private sector. The zone that we're in is known as SW9, and it encompasses Flambeau and Hamilton. And whichever company gets the rights to operate gaming in this area, they'll examine the commercial viability of the existing site, of the slots at Flambeau. They will take over that slot facility where we are currently leasing space at the track. And then they'll decide whether it will be financially beneficial to relocate into Hamilton's core and possibly add a convention center or hotel or other amenities that make it more than just a casino, or they can keep it right where it is and develop it there. These are the options that they're facing. So it's not a fait accompli that this is going to move. This is the option that the private sector operator will have once they get the right to operate gaming in this zone. Since the slots of Flambeau opened in October of 2000, the City of Hamilton has received almost $52 million from its share of the slots revenues, and that's based on 800 slot machines. There are over 220 employees, and OLG has paid them over $134 million in benefits and wages, and that is very substantial because that money remains here in your community. We've purchased more than $34 million from local and regional vendors, and we've sponsored local events to the tune of $525,000, and that's various festivals, music festivals, chamber breakfasts, mayor's breakfast, what have you. We feel that we are a good community and corporate partner for the City of Hamilton and for the area of Flambeau. So you may be wondering how a new gaming facility in the City of Hamilton could benefit the community. If a gaming site is built within Hamilton's core, the private sector operator has the discretion of building a new facility with up to 1,200 slots or less, depending on their business case. We've given them some parameters, and we just don't want them to exceed those parameters, but they will decide what they feel is best for this area. Again, this number is based on our business model that helps us determine the optimal number of slots to put in any given area due to customer demand. There's also the possibility of table games that will be determined by the company that takes over the rights to operate in this area. A relocated facility in the core of Hamilton has the potential to increase gaming revenues, which would lead to increased municipal commissions and a lot more economic activity. When we're talking about increased revenue, a relocated facility would be larger than the one currently at Flambeau and could grow current revenues by, we're estimating about 5% or more, depending on the private sector and their investment, the number of table games, and as I mentioned, the number of amenities, whether there is a convention center, hotel, restaurant, whatever the development may be. The potential range of revenue for the municipality will be between $5 and $7 million per year. Currently, Hamilton gets about $4 million per year from the slots of Flambeau. Tax assessment is another benefit to the city. That assessment on the new amenities could be between $1 and $3 million a year. The investment opportunity in the hundreds of millions of dollars. New construction with the amenities could be anywhere between $100 and $200 million. And again, that's private capital investment. Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation and the Government of Ontario are not building casinos. They're not building slot facilities anymore. This is why we want the private sector to do this. They can do it much more efficiently. They can upgrade these facilities. Because if we look at the facilities that we have right now, being our gaming facilities and our lottery infrastructure, we would have to invest over $1 billion to upgrade these facilities. These facilities are used 24/7. Our lottery terminals run every day. And if we ask the government to help have us spend $1 billion to upgrade these facilities, we know what the answer would be. It would be no. And where would the money come from? It would come from our bottom line. And that bottom line really does go to the province of Ontario for healthcare, for education. On average, we give about $2 billion a year to the province of Ontario. $1.5 billion goes to the operation of hospitals. $500 million is dispersed amongst responsible gambling initiatives, for amateur sports, for education. $120 million goes to the Ontario Trillium Foundation, which I know is a big benefactor for this community as well, too. And again, so that's $100 to $200 million in potential capital investment for a new facility. And then we're looking at increased jobs. Gaming jobs would go from 400 to 600, and that is not including the jobs that are associated with a convention center or a hotel. Those, again, would be up to the private sector to decide how many jobs are there, but that would be an increase as well, too. I mentioned earlier that we're renewing OLG's role in the oversight of lottery and gaming. This means that increased oversight and responsible gambling. Problem gambling, and this is what we say all the time, we're not hiding from this. It affects a small population, small percentage of our population, on average 3.4%. And we're fortunate in Ontario to have a vast and strong structure for responsible gambling. $40 million goes to the Ministry of Health for research, prevention, and treatment. And that $40 million comes from a share of the slots revenue. $14 million is from OLG's internal budget. We have a statutory, regulatory, and policy mandate to address problem gambling. And when the private sector takes over these facilities, the responsible gambling responsibility is not going to be a nice to have. It's going to be a must have. They're going to be audited by us and by third parties. And they will be checked on this stuff. So this is not something, again, that we're going to slough off to the private sector. This is something that will be there, will be increased, and there'll be strong oversight. And that's our responsibility as the OLG. Over the long term, the industry model that we have for Gambling Ontario will succeed from a business perspective and from a responsible gambling perspective if we broaden our player base. We can't rely on a small portion of players for our revenue, and that's a big myth around here. We seek regular and casual players who spend a small portion of their entertainment, of their disposable income, gambling in a healthy way over a long term. We need to understand how to help players to choose to gamble so that they don't get into trouble. This support makes them better customers, and we want it to result in healthier play habits. For those who may develop a problem, we ensure that there are supports in place, like free counseling in every community where a casino exists, and there's a longer list that we'll address a little later on this evening. And we're very grateful, OLG is very grateful for the strong working relationships we've developed and the collaborations that have helped us to design and deliver our RG programs. Like CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, they train all of our staff on our gaming floors to spot warning signs. And the Responsible Gambling Council, they have responsible gambling resource centers in every one of our facilities. OLG has been directed by the government to deliver a gold standard for responsible gambling. And this is what we will do, and this is what we will demand of our private sector operators. There's a lot more of what I can say in the 5 minutes, and I think the time is ticking down very quickly. But for more information, I ask you to look to our website, modernolg.ca. There's a lot of this information. It expands on what I've said. And also what's there are testimonials, videos from mayors of our host communities, chiefs of police from our host communities, chambers of commerce, and various other stakeholders that have been involved in us. Right now, we have 24 living case studies of what casinos and slot facilities do to communities. Please take a look at Modern OLG, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, our next speaker is Bruce Barber. Bruce is from the Great Canadian Gaming Company. He's the Executive Director of Horse Racing Operations at Flambeau Downs, currently at Flambeau Downs, and of course is the landlord, if I say it right, for the OLGs at Flambeau Downs. Bruce, you're on. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I too would like to thank the City of Hamilton for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about Great Canadian, but primarily to talk about horse racing, where it fits in this community and the effect of horse racing on the community, and quite frankly, the very, in my opinion, positive effect. At Great Canadian is the largest Canadian gaming company. We're publicly traded. We own 17 properties spread over 3 provinces and 1 state. We have properties in Nova Scotia, Ontario, British Columbia, and Washington State. And these range from small community casinos in towns like Dawson Creek to our flagship casino, which is in Richmond, BC, which is called River Rock, as well, and which is really critical for our discussions here tonight. We're also the largest racetrack company in Canada. We currently own 4 racetracks in Canada. To give you an idea of the scope of the company, we do about $1 billion a year in annual gaming revenues. Now, and with the majority of that revenue going to the provinces that we reside in. We also have $1 billion capital invested across our businesses, including the Flambeaus and Georgians of the world. We have a very strong balance sheet, and we're poised for growth and are prepared to grow here in Flambeau and Hamilton. On the racing side of the business, just to give you an idea of our background, we own 3 standardbred tracks, 1 in British Columbia, Fraser Downs, 2 here in Ontario, Georgian Downs and Flambeau Downs, as well as a thoroughbred track in British Columbia. Here in Ontario, we have invested over $210 million in our facilities, and that includes upfront capital as well as improvements over the last number of years. On the racing side of the business, at Flambeau Downs and Georgian Downs, we actually account for almost 10% of the total racing revenue in the province. And if you take the big Woodbine out of the equation for the signature tracks, et cetera, it's a much more important portion of the business for racing than just 10%, if you will. Flambeau, to give you an idea, and I'm assuming most have been to Flambeau, seen Flambeau. Flambeau is a multifaceted outlet. We have, as Tony said, we have 800 slot machines at Flambeau. Of course, we have standardbred racetrack. We have dining options. We have 4 different dining rooms. We have meeting rooms. We run 3 OTBs, off-track betting, 1 at the track on days that we're not racing live, plus 2 more in the community, 1 in Stony Creek and the other in Burlington. And at Flambeau itself, we've invested over $100 million. So we're very invested in Flambeau Downs. Flambeau Downs currently races 188 days of standardbred racing live, plus we're open virtually every day for simulcast racing. The actual handle at Flambeau, as I mentioned earlier, between our 2 Ontario tracks is close to $100 million. There's actually $67 million at Flambeau. And of that, live handle is $31 million. So a very key racetrack, not only for us, for Great Canadian, but for the horse people in the province of Ontario. So all of that sounds nice, but what does it mean? What does it mean to Hamilton? And what does it mean to horse racing here in Ontario? Flambeau Downs slot revenue to the City of Hamilton is approximately $4.6 million. We also pay just under $1 million, over $800,000 in municipal taxes to the City of Hamilton. As well, we purchase over $5 million in local goods. Salaries at the OLG and Flambeau amount to over $16 million a year. When I say the OLG and Flambeau, it's our employees and the employees that are employed by the OLG. One of the things that I think gets lost sometimes is the horses and the horse people. there are over $16 million in purse money made available to local horse people coming out of Flambeau Downs on a yearly basis. And over 66% of that stays locally. The catchment area for Flambeau Downs is Flambeau Downs, if you will. Most of the horses racing at Flambeau come from this area, and that purse money goes out to horse people here in the Flambeau area. As well, on the jobs side of it, there's another, we've talked about I've talked about the OLG jobs and the Flambeau jobs. There's also another approximately 250 jobs on any race day with people in the paddock, people like paddock judges, ORC judges, veterinarians, etc. So when you look at that, what does that mean totally? Totally, there's direct input into this community of over $36 million on a yearly basis comes out of Flambeau Downs and our horse racing community. And on the jobs side of that, as the OLG began their modernization process, you'll hear the term SARP, S-A-R-P, which is the Slots at Racetrack program. That program was canceled effective March 31st. And with that, the revenue that went with that revenue sharing between the OLG and Flambeau Downs and the horsemen. Ted McMeekin, Minister of Agriculture, back in May or June, formed a panel made up of 3 former cabinet ministers. We call it the OMAFRA panel, to look at this, at what's happening and a way to ensure that racing can continue to grow and thrive not just in Flambeau, but in the province of Ontario. As they've looked at that, one of the discussions has been around jobs and the economic impact beyond the 650 jobs, direct jobs that we know are at Flambeau Downs. The panel talked about how many jobs, from an economic standpoint, from a spin-off, if you will, were in the province of Ontario. And although they even say in their report they struggled with how many jobs were created by racing. But on a conservative note, they did say they believe that at a minimum there was 30,000 full-time jobs. Flambeau Downs races 12% of all of the racing here in the province of Ontario on the standardbred, overall racing, sorry. And that relates, if the panel's number of 30,000 really does mean that there's 3,600 more jobs in this area caused by racing. So it really makes the job impact of Flambeau Downs and the horse people and the horsemen here of 4,200 jobs in this area, directly and indirectly related to Flambeau.
Can I ask you to wrap it up, Bruce?
Oh, okay. Just on that then, I just wanted to make sure that everyone's aware that Flambeau Downs and Great Canadian Gaming is committed to horse racing at Flambeau Downs. But I also wanted to make sure everyone's aware that coming out of the AMAFRA report, they very clearly stated that there's no jurisdiction in the world that has world-class horse racing without government support. And that's what the panel's looking to do. But to be sure, so that everybody is aware, if there is no support for horse racing coming out of the panel or the Ontario government, horse racing will cease to exist, not only at Flambeau Downs at the end of March, but likely in all of Ontario. We know that racing will be significantly smaller than it is right now, but for racing to survive at Flambeau Downs, we do require the funds that would come from the government and OMAFRA. And with that,
Thank you very much, Bruce. Our next speaker is Deputy Chief Ken Leenders, or if you are from the country where I was born, you would say Leenders, or something like that, close. And Deputy Chief Leenders is going to share some reflections, some thoughts from the policing perspective. Deputy Chief.
Great, thank you very much. My name's Ken Leenders. I've been a deputy chief for 9 years and a police officer here in Hamilton for the last 33. From a policing point of view, we understand that there are concerns that a casino will increase crime in a neighborhood, will become the impetus for organized crime to flourish, or will increase gang activity. However, from all the review and statistical information, as well as academic research, it appears that this does not bear out. It appears that the fear of crime is much greater than crime itself. Now, in a 2012 study done by the University of Nevada reviewing the effects of a casino on crime, it shows that casinos might increase the total volume of crime in an area, but there will be an insignificant effect on the overall crime rate. Casinos are seen to have the impact similar to very large recreation or tourism draws, similar to a park or a fair. There is an increased enforcement that may be required to handle increase in crime, but the probabilities of becoming a victim will likely remain the same. From our work with Flambeau Downs, the Hamilton Police Service has seen approximately 758 calls for service in that location for the last 6 years. Now, although the Hamilton Police do not police the inside of the casino, we are responsible for all the activities outside the casino. Based on our records, the top 5 calls for service at Flambeau Downs are stolen autos, are trespassing, theft, intoxicated persons, and impaired drivers. We have also reviewed policing activities at our neighboring communities, which include Fallsview and Niagara casinos, as well as Woodbine casinos in Toronto, and found that there has been no significant impact with the increase of crime in these areas. The Niagara experience shows that the typical calls for service are, again, thefts, motor vehicle collisions, domestics, mischiefs, disturbances, and intoxicated persons. The inside of the Ontario casinos are policed by the OPP in conjunction with OLG. They are responsible for all calls for service within the casino, as well as gathering intelligence and preventing cheats at play. Casinos are highly regulated and have numerous safeguards to protect against organized crime, which includes background checks of all employees and owners. As for our increase in criminal activity outside the casino environment, there is no data that shows that there would be an increase in domestics, fraud, or other criminal activities that can actually be tied to the activities of a casino. From a Hamilton perspective, from a policing point of view, the Hamilton Police Service is committed to policing in this city to ensure the safety of the people and their property. It is not our position in law to comment on either support or reject the position of a casino within the city of Hamilton. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. Wait till there we go. Thank you. Our next speaker is Paul Burns. Paul Burns is the Vice President of the Canadian Gaming Association. Paul, you're on.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? The Canadian Gaming Association represents major operators and suppliers in Canada's gaming industry. We primarily sponsor research, speak out on important national and regional issues. We're a trade association for the industry. There is a lot of misinformation that often surrounds debates on casinos. And we applaud the city and especially the Gaming Facility Proposal Subcommittee for initiating this process. These are excellent and healthy processes. It's been designed to provide information so people can come to informed decisions, and we welcome that. Off the top, it's probably no surprise, but we do support the OLG's modernization initiative in bringing the private sector's expertise and experience to gaming in Ontario. And we have seen that gaming in Canada is a significant part of Canada's entertainment industry. It's an economic driver that generates thousands and thousands, over 100,000 jobs across the country. Good paying jobs, with the average salary here in Ontario being about $50,000 a year in our industry. We've had almost 2 decades of experience with gaming and casino gaming in Ontario communities, large and small, to look at. And that's a point I want to make, and I think everybody should remember. It's been a substantive and positive experience, creating thousands of well-paying jobs, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in economic development, billions of dollars in revenue for the province and for municipalities. So the question tonight really isn't, should casino gaming be allowed in the greater Hamilton area, because that's kind of been asked and answered. It's been here for over a decade. We've seen facilities not only here, but in Brantford, Mohawk Raceway, Falls View Casino in Niagara, short distances away for this community. What's really under consideration now is how best to work together with the OLG and the Ontario government to realize entertainment development that will be profitable for the community and sustainable over the long term. It's about where the best gaming facility can be located. What are the components? Horse racing, hotel, convention. These are things that will be decided by an operator and the community together that best serve as drivers of positive activities to increase tourism, create linkages with economic development, greater utilization for local suppliers and service providers. So the City of Hamilton has set out a process to determine what's in Hamilton's best interest, and we welcome that. I'm happy to answer your questions here tonight. There are a lot of myths and concerns around gaming. Deputy Chief just spoke to one about crime, and there are others around the rates of problem gambling and social costs and other things like that, and I'm happy to answer the questions with you tonight. So I turn it over to the chairman, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. Our next speaker is Mr. Robert Murray. Mr. Murray, Robert is manager of problem gambling for the Center for Addictions and Mental Health. Robert.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this important community event. We really do believe that any expansion of gambling in Ontario should be preceded and informed by this kind of community consultation. This is fantastic. First, let me tell you a little bit about the organization I represent. The Problem Gambling Institute of Ontario, and I'll refer to it as the PGIO, is a program of the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, otherwise known as CAMH. CAMH is the largest addiction and mental health hospital in Canada, a teaching hospital fully affiliated with the University of Toronto. The PGIO has the largest specialized gambling treatment program in Ontario. We provide training and support to Ontario's specialized problem gambling treatment system. You may know that there's about 52 agencies across the province that are given funding to provide treatment for problem gambling. And we work with a broad range of allied professional groups. We have an interactive website, problemgambling.ca, that in part provides online support for people with gambling problems and family members. We're also committed to the development of evidence-based solutions to gambling-related problems through research. As part of our role to reduce the harms associated with problem gambling, we have also been providing responsible gambling consultation and training to the OLG and other industry groups since 2005. We recognize that gambling is a social reality. But the issue that this community and many other communities need to deal with is what's the right balance here? What's the right balance between providing access to gambling, generating revenue for municipalities and governments on the one hand, and concern for the public health of our citizens on the other? I should state at the outset that the primary concern of my organization is for the public health of the citizens. We believe that government policies should put a priority on public health concerns over the goal of generating revenue. Gambling is a really big business in Ontario and readily available. In Southern Ontario, 93% of residents are within a 1-hour drive of a casino or a slot machine facility. For Hamilton residents, the amount of time drops to 40 minutes for a casino and 25 minutes for a slot machine facility. Ontario has the most electronic gaming machines, gaming tables, and lottery ticket terminals and games in Canada. In fact, total government gaming revenue in Ontario outpaces all other provinces by a wide margin. It should be understood that the plan for gambling expansion that we're talking about just doesn't include the casinos. We can talk about that later. But it has other elements to it that in combination has the goal of increasing net revenues by $1.3 billion. That's a B. Decreasing average player age from 55 to 53. So the industry is looking at lowering the age of participants. increasing player participation rates from 70 to 75%. All this by 2017. It's a very ambitious plan to expand gambling. Now, our next speaker will talk about the considerable evidence that gambling has a negative impact on health, on individuals, on communities, so I won't go there. And I think she'll talk a little bit about prevalence too, but just note that currently, up to 331,000 people, adults in Ontario, have a moderate to severe gambling problem, more than the populations of Burlington and Cambridge combined. And here's an important thing to consider. It's estimated that between 30 and 40% of Ontario's gambling revenues come from people with a gambling problem. Therefore, you should keep in mind that about a third of casino revenues from a Hamilton venue, should it be built, would come from people struggling with gambling problems. When you also think about the absolute number of people who are affected by problem gambling, the 330,000, multiply that by 10, because that's the number of people who are also affected by the individual with a gambling problem. Gambling as a social and health issue is relatively new compared to other concerns like problems with alcohol or drug abuse. A lot of people do have a really difficult time understanding why people get into trouble with it. And I'd like to spend a couple of moments addressing that. We know that certain groups are particularly at risk for gambling problems. These groups include people with a family history of addictions and mental health problems. By the way, 50% of us will have a mental health or addiction problem in our lifetime. People with pre-existing emotional and mental health problems. People with histories of trauma or abuse, a particular concern for women. People who are susceptible to boredom, who have poor impulse control. That would include people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, for example. Social isolation and lack of support is another factor. It should also be understood that a lot of people just don't understand how gambling works. There's a lot of myths and cognitive distortions that can fuel a problem with gambling. Belief in luck, belief in systems, belief in talismans like troll dolls are common. Many believe in what is referred to as the gambling fallacy. The more you lose, the more likely you're going to win. All of this indicates that people don't understand a fundamental element of gambling. That's randomness. I'm going to talk a little bit about slot machines in particular because they're the most problematic. Why would people develop a problem with slot machines? Speed of play and continuous nature of slot machine play is a big factor. Players on modern video slot machines can complete a game in as little as 3 seconds. There is virtually no pause between plays and virtually no opportunity to process what has happened. The intermittent nature of reinforcement of rewards that are involved with activities like slot machine play are also powerful in getting people to do something and keeping them do it. Slot machines also feature near wins that actually don't represent the real outcome of the play. It's a complicated bit of business here. We've got what's called virtual reels, a mechanism that really doesn't, you think you've got a cherry, and that cherry is just below it, the line. Looks like a near win, it's not. You lost big, but it doesn't look like that. Multi-line slot machines that are now standard in the gambling industry also present losses disguised as wins. In other words, the machine will go off with lights and sounds even though you win less than you bet. So all of these structural characteristics of slot machines can lead people to develop serious problems with gambling. In addition, the sensory effects of the games and the casino environment, the lights, the sounds, the colors, stimulate certain parts of the brain and can lead many people to a dissociative state that some people call the gambling zone. This can impair judgment and can be especially addictive for people looking for an escape. Again, our next feature, we're just, for lack of time, I won't go into it. We'll talk about the possibilities that we have to mitigate harm, the measures that we can take should a casino here in Hamilton be built, whatever. It should be understood, though, that those measures will only reduce the negative impacts to a certain degree. And actually, there is no agreement necessarily on the part of the industry that those measures will be taken. So again, thank you for inviting me, and I'll be glad to talk to you afterwards when we do our Q&A.
Thank you very much. Two things before we get to Dr. Richardson that I want to share with you. For those of you who are a little reticent to get behind a microphone and speak, we will be handing out cards for those who want to submit written questions, and Councillor Partridge will collect them and will formulate the question from the input, and we'll ask the question that way. I also want to recognize the arrival of two more members of Hamilton City Council, Councillor Bernie Morelli and Councillor Tom Jackson. Welcome very much. I think if I count there, I go down the list, that's 6 Hamilton councillors out of 8, and it's just tremendous to see so many of them come up the hill to Flambeau and visit with us. Thank you very much, sincerely. All right, our next speaker is our very own Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Elizabeth Richardson. Dr. Richardson.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. And just for those of you who don't know, I'm Hamilton's, oh my goodness, Medical Officer of Health. And I've been Medical Officer of Health since 1998. We, of course, run the public health services and programs for the City of Hamilton, and we also run a problem gambling treatment program through our alcohol, drug, and gambling services within the city. The information I'm going to present to you tonight is based on a lot of work done by Toronto, and that's why that name came to light. They had a study that was commissioned with the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health and did a lot of work on analyzing some data on an Ontario-wide basis. There's been a lot of studies that have been done in this area. There's still a lot of uncertainty when it comes to research in this area, as you've heard from some of the speakers, but that's also why you'll see some different opinions coming through depending on where the information has come from. So when we look at gambling, gambling occurs across a whole spectrum. There's people who don't gamble at all, of course. There's people who gamble infrequently, and there's people who gamble more so. And some of those people get into problems with gambling. And when we're talking about problem gambling, we're talking about a continuous or periodic loss of control over that gambling behavior. A preoccupation with gambling or thinking about the money that they want to get for gambling, and really some irrational thinking and continuing on with this despite the adverse consequences that occur. And I'll talk more about those in a minute. Why is public health interested in gambling? Traditionally that hadn't been one of our programs and services. We had taken over a treatment program when that began some years ago. But largely it's because of the expansion in gambling that's happened worldwide over the last 30 years, not just here in Ontario, but elsewhere as well. And so there's an increased number of people who are participating in gambling, and with that comes an increased absolute number of people who have problem gambling problems. And so when we look at the health and social impacts of that, that's why public health is interested in the issue. As Mr. Murray just said, there's also the impact that goes beyond the individuals themselves, but onto their family members and onto the community as well in terms of problem gambling. From a public health perspective, we step back and we take a broad view of things. What are the health and social and economic impacts, positive and negative, associated with any particular activity? We're interested in promoting informed attitudes, and that's why forums such as this are so important for making decisions such as these, and as well balanced policies when it comes to any public health issue, including gambling. We think it's really important to promote and support people to continue healthy behavior. Of the 66% of Ontarians and likely a similar amount of Hamiltonians that participate in gambling, by far for most that's a leisure activity that they have a good time at. But for some it is not. We want to promote people to stay in that healthy spectrum and help people from moving down that risk continuum to becoming problem gamblers. And for those that do, we want to get them the help to move back out of that zone and to minimize the impacts of those harms on their life and the lives around them. The overall prevalence, as Robert said I would talk about, of problem gambling has been mentioned before. Within Ontario, it's somewhere between 1.2 and 3.4%. So for Hamilton, that's about 5,000 people are currently affected by problem gambling at a minimum, and up to maybe 17,000 people. A further 3% are at risk, so another 15,000 people are at risk of problem gambling. And about 18% of people from the survey data that's been done most recently have shown some signs that may indicate problem gambling is an issue for them. They've spent more than they wanted to, and about 4% have tried to win back their losses, which we know doesn't happen. It's already been mentioned in terms of the gambling revenues, about 36% of gambling revenue comes from problem gamblers, and that also depends on the type of gambling they're participating in. It's higher for certain types. So overall, it's clear if we increase the participation rates, at least on an absolute numbers basis, if that problem gambling rate stays the same, the absolute number of people who have issues with problem gambling will increase. So Robert's already gone over the factors that increase the risk of problem gambling at the individual level and as well at the environmental level, and I'll just perhaps round out with a few more of those. So at an individual level, youth are at higher risk, older adults, males, people with financial challenges, people on low incomes, and particularly for them because they tend to gamble a higher percentage of their income than people who are at higher income levels, people who experience early wins. There's also those environmental factors which make problem gambling more likely to occur. If there's greater access to gambling, the participation rates increase. So that can be availability in your community. That can also encompass the whole idea of proximity. So the closer it is, studies have shown that you're more likely to gamble if that casino or that center is closer to you than if it's further away. The type of gaming, as has been described, is also important. So electronic gaming machines, slot machines, VLTs, those sorts of things carry a higher risk of problem gambling than do other forms of play. And that's really borne out in the data that we looked at from Connex, which is the problem gambling hotline, and from our own data where we see among our problem gamblers that we work with, slots are the major issue. That's not to say there aren't people who have problems with lotteries and other forms of gambling, but that is the top issue. We also know that operating policies do tend to influence whether problem gambling occurs. If we're talking about maintaining responsible gambling practices, it's important to have the cues and the supports to maintain those. So things like operating hours and having a break from play. Things like having a clock so you can gauge how much time you've been playing at the tables for or at the slots. Bet size, access to money on the floor, all those things. And I'll come back to those a little bit more in a minute. In terms of overall health impacts, problem gambling is associated with a number of mental health issues. Depression, anxiety, ADD or attention deficit disorders also been talked about tonight, personality disorders. Overall, problem gamblers' sense of well-being is less so than other people's. About 76% of non-problem gamblers say they feel mentally well, and only about 35% of problem gamblers. One of the most troubling things is around suicide. About 37.9% of problem gamblers say they experience suicidal thoughts, and of those, about 20.5% of problem gamblers have made a suicide attempt. And that's higher in youth who are problem gamblers. And yes, there are youth under the age of 18 who are also problem gamblers. There's an association as well with substance abuse, and the numbers vary here on this as well, but anywhere from a 20 to 60% codependence, as we call it, or having both a problem gambling problem as well as a nicotine or tobacco problem and an alcohol or other substance abuse issue. Generally, problem gamblers just don't feel as well. Similar sorts of ideas. They tend to have more health complaints, more problems with colds and flu, fatigue, stress-related symptoms, headaches, those sorts of things. And in part that may be because they spend a lot of time in gambling activities rather than spending it in other leisure activities such as exercise or in other healthy eating habits and sleep habits and those sorts of things. So that may explain that. Family-wise, there are impacts, as we've heard about. There's financial impacts. on the individual when it comes to problem gambling, and those can extend to their family, whether it's a periodic inability to, make the rent this month, or whether it becomes more of a financial crisis when they've spent their life savings, or have to declare bankruptcy and those sorts of things. And you can see how those can impact further on the family and the relationships within the family. The stress that can come to those relationships as people try to hide or get into issues of debt and fraud, and the breakdown and divorce in relationships that can then ensue. From a community perspective, there has been described an increase in alcohol and fatigue-related traffic accidents associated with problem gambling. Employment impacts around lateness, absenteeism, illness, theft, those sorts of issues have also been described, and of course the overall bankruptcy impacts. I did just want to come back to that issue of youth. It's something that's near and dear to our hearts within public health services is the youth in the community, and there is a problem gambling program that's operated by the Y in Hamilton, as it is in many other places. Youth these days are growing up with more exposure than ever to legalized gambling. And we're not quite sure what that's going to mean. We know their problem gambling rates are probably about the same as others, maybe a little higher from some studies. But this issue of the increased suicide rate among youth and the fact that many problem gamblers talk about how their problem gambling started in youth is a concern for us going forward. So we recommended that in our report that went to the Board of Health on December 3rd and then on to the gaming subcommittee, that a public health approach be taken to gambling. So again, that's looking at the issue broadly, considering how we can help people who choose to engage in gambling to maintain healthy practices, looking at ways we can help to reduce harms for those who have gone down the spectrum and help to protect as well vulnerable populations who are at higher risk. So there's a number of approaches there, and one of those as well is public policy approaches. And one of the most promising things by many researchers have found, although there's still research to be done on it, is operating policies such as limiting casino hours, not having ATM machines on the floor, limiting alcohol on the floor, implementing a mandatory player card system so the data can be collected to look at gambling patterns, and so that individuals can receive back information on their gambling habits and how that compares to others who are gambling. And a few other policies are there as well. Important to us as well is that the research continue on all the aspects of gambling, but also on this gambling expansion as it goes forward. And not, as Robert has said, just around the casino issue, but at the broader expansion in activities in bingo halls, internet-based gambling, and those sorts of things, so that we can look at and make informed decisions as a society and as this community about where we want to go with this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. Our final speaker on the panel, you had been notified, perhaps some of you saw that in the media and so forth, that Professor Hannah Holmes would be speaking on some of the economic impacts of gambling in our community. Professor Holmes is unable to be here tonight. She will be joining those of you who attend tomorrow night's meeting at City Hall, also at 6:30. But on very short notice, we were fortunate and thankful that we were able to recruit Dr. Atif Kubersi. He is a professor of economics at McMaster University. He has a PhD in economics and statistics and has been with the McMaster Department of Economics since 1969. Dr. Kubersi.
Thank you very much. I'm the last speaker, and I feel like the last husband of Elizabeth Taylor. There isn't much new I could bring to the arrangement, but I'll try. Let me say right at the outset, there is nothing healthier than debating this issue with informed people, with experts, but also in an inclusive community participation. And there is really good room and there is good reason to debate this because the issues are complex, but also the whole framing of the issue needs to be deconstructed. We tend to exaggerate the economic benefits, and I'm guilty of it. I wrote the report for the horse racing, the 30,000 numbers I estimated. I've done hundreds of these studies. Mr. Burns knows that I was involved in these things because it's easy and very simple and straightforward to estimate the economic benefits. Their systems, their malls, their calculating machines almost programmed to do this in very simple terms. The social impacts are real, just as real, but very hard and difficult to estimate. But there is no question here, the issue about gambling is not about the positive economic impacts. They're there, they're large, but the real issue is about net economic impacts. And this is really the issue, is to subtract, to take charges against these positive impacts, trying to evaluate and estimate what are these costs. And there are many. Let me begin with the first one. The money that people tend to spend on gambling represents redirected expenditures. There were studies, lots of them. In Wisconsin, for example, they found out through a very well-established evidence-based research that 10% of the money spent on gambling was spent on groceries. That about 24% that was spent on gambling was spent on clothing. That about 34% that was spent on gambling was typically saved and represents a drawdown. But at the same time, they found out that 40% of the people would have spent this money on some place elsewhere where gambling exists. So the story is a bit mixed, but nonetheless, one ought to recognize that there is a cannibalization here. The people in the horse racing industry understand this, that horse racing was the only gambling activity, and when the casinos came, the horse racing industry suffered major and catastrophic results and had to be somehow shored up by bringing in slot machines. So the cannibalization problem is a real and substantive one to take account. Then there are also the issues that we have to take account of, some of the problem gambling. And the issue here is, yes, 90% of the people gamble without any problem, but then there are this small strata, small subset of people who tend to develop problems, and they tend to really represent a very large proportion of the revenues of these gambling activities. And the issue is, to what extent can we pair the social cost and the problems that these people bring about, not only to themselves and their families. They say that not only 10 times. Some of the estimates I've seen, Goodman and others, who have really said that for every problem gambler, there are about 17 people other than the problem gambler that are affected, from the employers, from the people in the neighborhood, from the health system, from the policing system, from the social welfare system, from the health system. So there are a number of issues here that you need to factor in and price into this equation so that these positive impacts that we talk about are made more realistic and made more representative of the underlying situation, so that we do not exaggerate the economic benefits, but have a very proper and balanced view of this. There are also the issues of talking about the other negative things. The deputy chief was absolutely right that if you look at the host communities in Niagara, the host community in Windsor, the host community in Rama, crime did not increase. But one thing Deputy Chief should have told you, the casinos paid for extra policing and put lots of money into hiring officers. So it's not the issue that gambling does or does not do, it's what sort of gambling do we have? What social arrangements do we make? What social and institutional changes that we bring in, budget changes in the allocation of the surplus that is generated? How much back did we put into problem gambling, into the health system, into the educational system, and into the supporting systems? The other issue is that, yes, indeed, there are other issues. There's noise, there's congestion, there are things. But people would really say, look, I mean, Hamiltonians are not going to have a casino, and this would be a new thing. In many respects, they gamble. They have Flambeau, they could go even to Mohawk. If they are venturous, they go to Niagara and get fleeced. But they could really definitely have many important access. 69%, as you were told, play the lotteries. And there is really an issue here. To what extent a responsible community would want to evaluate in a proper, balanced way, not only the positive benefits, but all the social costs attendant to this, and what sort of price and what sort of arrangement that one could conjure, could construct, so that they maximize the benefits. I would advise you as an economist, don't take this casino without the convention center, without another node. Let these people who are going to make these millions on the back of the ignorant and the hopeful, that they invest in this community and invest profusely and generously. You are really before an important choice, and in a democratic system, it's your choice, and let's make this choice on a balanced, a more appropriate, and a more informed one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I stated at the outset that I hoped that we would listen very carefully, and I think we have, and that we would learn a lot, and I know I've learned a lot.